In the year 2000, at a public university, in the research room of Associate Professor Yaku, he was working diligently when his assistant entered and called out to him. But Yaku showed no reaction at all, until she approached him closely and called out. Only then did he startle and notice her. The assistant smiled and introduced Yaku to someone from a pharmaceutical company who had arrived to discuss cooperation. Yaku let his assistant guide the man first, saying he would talk with him shortly after. The assistant then led the pharmaceutical company man away, and as they walked, he mentioned the associate professor, how Yaku's talent was recognized by everyone, and how any research Yaku participated in was world-class, and thanks to his research, many patients had been cured. Meanwhile, Yaku was still working diligently until his alarm rang. Only then did he notice the time. It was already midnight. Yaku looked at the portrait on his desk, then went to have a light meal. It was a photo of himself and his little sister who had a serious illness. She had a tumor in a position that couldn't be removed, which had taken the little girl's life. No doctor could help her, everyone had given up treatment, but only Yaku couldn't accept it. After finishing his light meal, Yaku went to the drug synthesis lab. About an hour later, the medicine would be complete, and Yaku would have some time to rest. He set his alarm clock and fell into sleep. Yaku hadn't spoken with patients for who knows how long. He only hoped that someday he could be a doctor in a small village. Until the next morning when his assistant returned to find him. She only saw Yaku lying motionless on the bed with both hands hanging limp. As for Yaku, he was just groggily waking up. In front of him was a pink-haired girl, very concerned for him. Yaku looked but didn't understand anything. He tried to crawl down from the bed and fling open the window to see, and to his surprise, before Yaku was a very large garden. After that, the pink-haired girl handed Yaku a mirror, this face and these memories. Yaku realized that he had died from overwork, and seeing that Yaku seemed to have lost his memory, the girl introduced herself to him. "My name is Lot, Yaku's personal maid." At this moment, Yaku felt itchy and wanted Lot to help him remove his bandages. Lot acknowledged the order and ran off to prepare immediately. But when Yaku rolled up his sleeve, he realized that the note he had written before going to sleep had followed him to this life. While helping Yaku wash his body, Lot discovered a strange symbol on his arm. To her it was the sign of the medicine saint, but to a modern person like Yaku, it was just a leftover lightning mark. Lot knelt down and prayed, thanking the medicine deity for keeping the young master safe after yesterday's accident. Medicine deity? Yaku heard but still didn't understand anything, so he had to have Lot help him confirm a few things. He was the young master of the Medicis family, a great noble of the St. Fleuve Empire, and also a royal pharmacist. Yaku's father had been given the title of Grand Noble by the Emperor. This title was only bestowed upon those with special skills, a title even more noble than a duke. Yaku's grandfather was the dean of the Royal Pharmaceutical Institute. Lot led Yaku to the portrait displayed in the house, introducing each person one by one. First, the largest painting placed in the center was of his father, Grand Noble Bruno. On the right was Lady Beatrice and his sister Blanche, and on the left was his elder brother Pal, who was currently studying abroad at Overworked Pharmaceutical University, the best pharmaceutical institute in the world. That's why old man Bruno was very hopeful about the two brothers, one who was good at academics and one who was blessed by the gods, which was the sign of the medicine deity on Yaku's arm. Yaku still didn't quite understand the god's blessing. Using divine magic to create surprises. Is it like magic? He wondered. Looking at Yaku's blank face made Lot afraid. Could it be that he had forgotten even that? Because being able to use divine magic was proof of nobility, and Yaku used to be very good at it. This was a very big problem. If Yaku could no longer use divine magic, he might be expelled from the house. Yaku heard this and became a bit worried, so he returned to his room to try to remember. According to Lot's description, he could use water attribute divine magic. To perform divine magic, Yaku first had to think about the form of water. Yaku guessed that the form of water might be the molecular structure of water, so he got up and recalled what he had learned in his previous life. In Yaku's mind, the structure of water began to appear, and immediately the strange mark on his arm glowed. Then water appeared in the palm of Yaku's hand, which startled him with surprise. He had created it but didn't know how to stop. So Yaku had to run straight to the window, releasing all the water he had just created. Lot standing below realized what had happened. She was very happy that Yaku had finally remembered how to use divine magic. Yaku returned to his room and began to analyze this divine magic. He only needed to think about the structure of water for it to appear. This made Yaku wonder if he could create other things. Yaku tried it right away, and indeed he had succeeded. Not only could he create water, now Yaku could create gold, sodium, sulfur, sugar. He could create pure substances, but not compounds. Yaku had also mastered his ability. His left hand created matter, while his right hand could remove it. At this moment, a knock on the door sounded. Yaku hurriedly removed all the things he had just created. Lot ran in excitedly congratulating Yaku. But then she suddenly remembered what if Yaku had forgotten his pharmaceutical knowledge. She told Yaku to try to remember, because old man Bruno often asked questions related to pharmaceuticals during meals. So Yaku and Lot went to the library to review the knowledge. A bookshelf completely packed with books, and Yaku only needed to look to remember everything immediately. This surprised him as well. This boy named Falma had already memorized all the books there. That evening, Yaku wandered to the family dining room, and as soon as his mother and sister saw him, they immediately asked about him. Sitting at the table, Yaku realized that this was truly a good family, so from now on, he would live as a son of this family, just as Lot had told him. Indeed, the patriarch Bruno asked Yaku a question related to pharmaceuticals, and Yaku answered very smoothly. Seeing that Yaku's cognitive abilities were fine now, he decided that Yaku would go back to school the very next day with Miss Elio. The next morning, the lesson with Miss Ellen began. Just upon meeting Yaku, she noticed something was off about him. That calm demeanor wasn't like the young master Alma at all. Yaku quickly used the excuse that he had been struck by lightning, so his memory was not very stable, which made Ellen less suspicious of him. The lesson began. Today, instead of studying pharmaceutical knowledge, Miss Ellen wanted to review divine magic knowledge for Yaku. Divine magic was something all nobles could use, and they would have their own guardian deities. The guardian deity of Yaku's family was the medicine deity, while Miss Ellen's was the water deity. Divine magic had a total of 5 attributes, related to the elements on Earth, plus 2 special attributes, yin and yang. At this point, Yaku raised a question. He understood the attributes of water and fire, but he couldn't remember what the void attribute was. On this matter, Ellen's knowledge was also limited, because the void attribute had not been documented by anyone for over 300 years. Yaku had another question. If one could create matter, which type would it belong to? Ellen confirmed that there was no such attribute. Creating matter was something humans couldn't do. Only deities or monsters had this ability. After the theoretical part, Miss Ellen led Yaku to the riverbank to begin the practical lesson. Seeing that Yaku hadn't brought his staff, she scolded him, so Miss Ellen had to lend him her staff. Her requirement was for Yaku to shoot a water arrow to the other side. Seeing that Yaku had forgotten this technique, Miss Ellen had to demonstrate once for Yaku to see. Ellen channeled her power and shot a stream of water into the sky, which surprised Yaku. But to Ellen, this technique was very basic, and Yaku had easily done it before. Yaku took the staff and began to practice. However, he had only thought about the structure of water when an extremely strong stream of water was shot out, leaving Ellen stunned. She anxiously ran over to check on Yaku, wondering how he could cast magic without reciting the incantation. More importantly, the water stream just now was too powerful. Ellen worried that Yaku had used up all his divine power for his entire life in that one move, so she had to get a staff to help Yaku check his divine power. Yaku grabbed it, and it glowed brilliantly, once again frightening Ellen and leaving her bewildered. This divine power exceeded the staff's assessment capability. It should be known that no divine magic user had ever been able to do that before. Ellen anxiously reminded Yaku that from now on, he should not grab the assessment staff in front of others, not even his father. The lesson ended there. Due to the earlier surprise, Ellen had dropped her glasses, and without them, she couldn't see the way home. Again, Yaku had to take her hand and lead her. They sat down on a stone bench to rest. At this point, Yaku showed Ellen a trick to help her see the way even without glasses. Using her hand to create a small hole and looking through it like a lens would help her see. Just as Yaku was demonstrating this to Ellen, he inadvertently noticed that on Ellen's right hand, one finger was glowing blue. He ran over to check Ellen and learned that this finger had been injured just this morning. Yaku still didn't quite understand this ability and questioned Ellen about it. Ellen was sweating profusely and retreated backward, seeing others' wounds and assessing them. This was exactly the divine eye of the deity. What exactly was Yaku? Ellen's face was in extreme terror as she looked toward Yaku. He didn't have a shadow. Yaku wanted to help Ellen get up, but by then Ellen was too scared. She didn't dare stay near Yaku anymore and immediately ran away. The next day, Yaku was called to his father's room about the issue with teacher Ellen. She had used the excuse of having a severe fever and requested an extended leave. He wanted to ask if Yaku knew what was going on with her, as the illness excuse was probably just a pretext. Yaku immediately recalled what had happened yesterday. Surely she was afraid of him now. Marquis Bruno sighed deeply, also giving up on Ellen. Nurturing disciples was also a form of training for a physician, yet she couldn't do it. Then he gave Yaku a letter and a vial of medicine, asking him to deliver them to Ellen for him. Yaku accepted the task, took the medicine vial, and returned to his room to examine it. According to the Marquis, this was just an energy booster, but if she had a fever, he thought a different medicine should be used. Yaku immediately prepared another vial of medicine before going to Ellen's house. Sitting in the living room waiting for her, the door began to open slightly, and Ellen, wearing full armor, met Yaku because she feared Yaku had come to silence her. Yaku quickly explained that he was only there to deliver medicine from his father to her. Upon hearing this, Ellen became even more panicked, thinking the delivery of medicine was actually the delivery of poison to her. Of course, that wasn't the case. Yaku presented two types, one from his father and one for fever that he had prepared himself. The reason Yaku did this was because he wanted Ellen to continue teaching him. Ellen didn't quite understand Yaku's intention. If Yaku was the medicine deity reincarnated, why would he need her to teach him? Yaku didn't think so. He believed he was just an ordinary person. Hearing this, Ellen realized the issue. If that was what Yaku wanted, she would still accompany him, and of course, she would keep all of Yaku's secrets. Yaku smiled and moved forward to touch Ellen's hand, saying he needed her knowledge. Divine magic was like a power passed down by word of mouth. There were no books teaching divine magic in his house, only books on medicine, so to control his power, he still needed Ellen to teach him. Yaku reached into his bag and took out a bouquet of flowers, thanking Ellen for teaching him, then left so Ellen could rest more. Holding the bouquet Yaku had given her, Ellen's face turned red. The type of medicine Yaku had given was a powder form, a medicine Ellen had never seen before, so she was still a bit afraid, but when she thought about it, the medicine deity was a good deity who protected others, so how could Yaku harm her? Moreover, the bouquet Yaku had given her was sky blue flowers, Ellen's favorite color. Thinking of this, Ellen no longer doubted him and took the medicine. The next morning, Ellen came to see Yaku to continue her job as his teacher. Nevertheless, she still wore a full set of armor, but this time not out of fear of Yaku, but to protect herself, because Yaku's power was very great and he couldn't control it. Another reason for Ellen to continue her work was that she couldn't just abandon Yaku. If he couldn't control his divine magic power, then most likely this city would be in danger. Ellen smiled and thanked Yaku, saying the medicine he had given her was very effective. Ellen had also prepared a curriculum to teach Yaku, and took him to a deserted island to ensure maximum safety. The lesson went very smoothly. Although Yaku still couldn't control his power, Ellen was very happy this time, and until he could completely control his power, she would gladly continue to teach him. In the following days when there was no class with Ellen, Yaku practiced getting familiar with the medicine eye at the mansion. Just by looking, Yaku could see where people were injured, and from there begin to diagnose the disease they were suffering from. Almost everyone in the mansion was injured, especially Uncle Cedric, who had degenerative spine disease in his legs, a condition that required long-term treatment. Through practice, Yaku had understood a bit more about his ability. If a disease was completely cured, the emitted light would disappear, but if it wasn't completely eradicated, a faint light would remain. All of these observations were recorded by Yaku in his notebook. Thinking of this, Yaku let out a sigh. His existence in this world was considered superstitious. If this abnormal ability was revealed, plus the fact that he had no shadow, the possibility of him being sentenced to death was certain. To prevent this from happening, he needed to become close with everyone in the family, starting with Lot first. Yaku discovered she had eczema, so he rushed back to his room wanting to prepare medicine for her. As expected of a pharmaceutical family, all necessary support tools were already available, so it only took a short while to complete. Yaku immediately brought it to Lot. The girl was touched and teary-eyed, then asked Yaku to give some to the other servants in the house as well. So he and Lot began distributing medicine, and everyone who received medicine from Yaku was very happy, because ordinary servants wouldn't be able to receive medicine from their masters. Yaku's family was a family of high status, Old man Bruno only treated other nobles, and servants in the house would not enjoy such privileges. This was a feudal society, so these rules had been established for a very long time. Yaku understood a bit about that. However, for him, the division of class and social status wasn't right at all. Lot found this very reasonable, because even if the old man broke the law by examining servants, they wouldn't have enough money to pay for the medicine anyway. Then Yaku and Lot left, and he had to think a lot about the issue just now. The pricing of medicine in this era wasn't reasonable at all, and from his observation, there wasn't any truly effective medicine either. If medicine could be distributed to the people, that would be so much better. Thus, Yaku had his goal. He decided that from now on, he would give medicine to those who truly needed it. Lot heard this and was extremely moved. Lately she had seen a big change in Yaku. He no longer treated servants with class discrimination, so he would definitely become a great pharmacist. The next morning, when Yaku came for breakfast, he didn't see his sister Blanche anywhere, and the faces of his father and mother were very serious. Then Yaku learned that Blanche had contracted chickenpox. A bit about this disease: it's a virus-caused illness. Children have a high chance of contracting it, but once infected and cured, there's very little chance of recurrence. On Earth, this disease isn't very dangerous, but looking at Mr. Bruno's face, Yaku could guess that here it was dangerous. Mr. Bruno decided that from now on, no one was to contact Blanche for 3 weeks, and caring for the little girl would be done by some servants. Yaku felt a bit uneasy because Blanche was just a child. Abandoning her didn't seem right. Mr. Bruno found it very normal, as 4 years ago he had done the same with Yaku. After the reminder, he had business and immediately left. Yaku returned to his room and began calculating about chickenpox. He wanted to use a medicine from Earth to treat his sister. Thanks to his skill of creating matter, he could easily obtain the necessary ingredients for the medicine. Then Yaku found an opportunity when the servants weren't paying attention to sneak into Blanche's room. He activated the medicine eye to diagnose his sister once more, and indeed, this was chickenpox. So Yaku immediately gave her the medicine. Blanche instantly covered herself with a blanket, not wanting to drink it, complaining that the medicine was very bitter. So Yaku immediately came up with a solution. He mixed the medicine with a sweet pastry to coax Blanche to eat. After she had eaten, Blanche curiously asked Yaku. Father had said that this disease had no cure. Yaku jumped and had to quickly make up an excuse to deceive Blanche. After giving her the medicine, Yaku stayed to play with her, which made Blanche very happy. The little girl saw that Yaku had changed, because from before until now, Yaku had never cared for her like this. Blanche smiled and said she loved Yaku very much. This utterance made Yaku immediately remember his sister in his old world. She was also like Blanche now. Thanks to Yaku's care, Blanche's recovery speed was very fast. Even Patriarch Bruno was surprised by this, but when he asked for the reason, of course Blanche would cover for Yaku. Returning to his room, Yaku began to think about his abilities again, creating matter and seeing the diseases of others. This was something ordinary people couldn't do. This made Yaku a bit worried. Could he use such a power without exchanging anything in return? Yaku had also completed his new lens. With this, from now on he wouldn't need to make figures while diagnosing diseases anymore. At this moment, the butler came to call Yaku, saying the old master had summoned him down for an urgent matter. Yaku ran down to his father's room and was instructed to prepare his belongings immediately. He would follow him into the royal palace to examine the emperor's illness. While explaining to Yaku, he coughed repeatedly, and Yaku could immediately tell this wasn't a simple cough. Yaku was about to diagnose his father when the man reminded him not to, fearing discovery, so Yaku stopped. Regarding the disease the emperor was suffering from, he couldn't tell Yaku in advance. After that, he and Yaku went to the palace. There were countless servants attending the emperor's room. Seeing Grand Noble Bruno arrive, they rushed to greet him and reported that the emperor's condition wasn't good at all, which Bruno already knew. His Majesty's lungs were very weak. After paying respects, the bed curtains were opened, and Yaku was quite surprised that the emperor was a woman. Elizabeth Roman too lay weakly on the bed, unable to move even a hand. At this point, the Grand Noble asked Yaku to get his case. He took out a knife, made a small cut on Her Majesty's finger, then dropped it into a test tube, which immediately glowed. Yaku watched without understanding. Could this be how this world diagnosed diseases? When the emperor's bed curtains closed, the Grand Noble went to see the astrologer, who could only shake his head and report back that the emperor's destiny was very bad, seemingly not able to hold on much longer. Bruno could only grimace and accept the truth, though in his opinion, if they took careful care of Her Majesty, they might still have a small chance to save her. Saying this, the Grand Noble called Yaku to follow him. His task was to stand by and assist while his father prepared medicine. In Yaku's mind at this moment were countless thoughts about the pharmacists of this world. They had the right to prescribe medicine independently, so they could both treat and compound medicine at the same time. Standing aside observing, Yaku immediately recognized that the Grand Noble was using a type of opium. Perhaps he was preparing some kind of anesthetic. After preparation, the Grand Noble approached Her Majesty's bed. She weakly looked at Bruno and asked him to tell the truth, whether she was beyond help. To reassure Her Majesty, Bruno showed the vial of medicine he had just prepared, telling her this medicine was extremely effective and would help her breathe more easily. Yaku stood watching and couldn't accept it. That medicine had no effect whatsoever beyond temporarily easing her pain. At this moment, those close to the Emperor had accepted the truth, whispering to each other to order the guards to summon the priest. The Emperor would probably only live until tomorrow evening. Yaku frowned, unable to accept it. So many people were standing in this room, yet none of them could cure her. Calling priests and using pain relief methods was no different than helping her die without pain. Unable to watch any longer, Yaku activated his medicine eye and began diagnosing the Empress. She had quite a few illnesses. Her lungs were very weak. There was cancer, bronchial dilation, and pneumonia. Yaku looked more closely. This wasn't ordinary pneumonia. This was pulmonary tuberculosis, also fondly known as the White Death. Since this world didn't have CT scans, the only way to treat the Empress was to take medicine. In Yaku's mind, he immediately calculated a total of 4 methods, and the rifampicin method was the most effective. But creating that medicine wasn't easy because it had a large molecular mass and a very complex structure that was difficult to imagine precisely. What if he failed? This thought made Yaku a bit worried, but when the Empress's children rushed into the room, crying miserably for her, Yaku regained a doctor's determination. He had to face his patient, face that disease, and save the Empress's life. Yaku sighed deeply, and with all his determination, he approached the Empress's bed, paid respects, and expressed his wish to treat her. Bruno was startled, thinking his son was being impulsive and was about to send him away, but the Empress stopped him. The fact that Yaku confidently asked to treat her meant he must know what her disease was. Yaku's eyes were filled with determination, so the Empress also stopped the officials in the room. When she was healthy, she was the most terrifying divine magic user in the country, so she had the ability to judge who she could trust. She could see in Yaku's eyes that only he in this room hadn't given up, so she decided to entrust her life entirely to Yaku. Yaku accepted the mission and immediately shut himself in his room, ignoring his father knocking outside. Yaku remained focused on his work. To eradicate the tuberculosis virus with medicine, he needed to combine 3 to 4 different types of medicine. In his mind, Yaku imagined the molecular structure of each medicine, wrote them all down on notes, and began using his power to create those medicines. At this moment, Bruno broke down the door and scolded Yaku, saying no pharmacist in this world could cure the White Death, and implementing random knowledge would not be considered a pharmacist, especially having a new remedy. Bruno was very angry and demanded Yaku to stop immediately. Yaku wouldn't accept that. He assured his father that he had a remedy for the White Death to treat Her Majesty, and he was doing this to save his father too. Yaku ignored him and continued compounding. Then Bruno shot through his note. Yaku immediately turned around and created an ice wall separating the two of them, which startled Bruno, shocked that Yaku could cast divine magic without needing a divine staff or incantations. He broke out in a cold sweat, pointed his divine staff at Yaku, and asked who he was. When he saw the glowing mark on Yaku's hand, he realized it was the Holy Seal. Bruno held his head, lamenting that he couldn't believe his son had been blessed by the medicine deity. At this point, Bruno withdrew his staff and reminded Yaku once more that the Empress had bet her life on Yaku's medicine, so he himself must also bet his life on this new medicine. That was the responsibility and pride of a pharmacist. Yaku understood and removed the ice wall separating them, then focused back on his work. Watching his son diligently compounding medicine before him reminded Bruno of the boy's childhood image, and he inadvertently asked Yaku if he was truly his son. A moment later, Yaku brought the medicine to Her Majesty. The Minister Claude was very worried and questioned Bruno, asking if he wasn't going to stop his son. Bruno had intended to do so, but now he could only observe, because in his view, the boy's technique had far surpassed his own. Yaku brought the medicine to the Empress's bed and began to explain. First, he showed her a sample of her phlegm and asked her to look closely at it under candlelight. The Empress didn't quite understand, but still cooperated. Immediately, she was surprised because when looking through the light, she could see living organisms moving inside. She called Minister Claude over and showed him. Claude was astounded and showed it to others as well. At this point, Yaku began to explain that those wriggling things in the phlegm sample were called bacteria, and they were the cause of the Empress's White Death disease. This was a persistent disease, so Yaku wanted the Empress to undergo regular treatment. If she could adhere to his medicine-taking method for half a year, her disease would be completely cured. The Empress heard this and broke out in a sweat, because Yaku's explanation had revolutionized the concept of disease as it had been known. She decided to trust Yaku and use his medicine. Yaku poured the medicine into 2 cups and drank one in front of everyone before it was the Empress's turn. He then approached the other ministers and loudly and boldly declared that when the Empress's condition improved, the people of the empire would no longer have to fear the incurable White Death. After completing the treatment for the Empress, Yaku and the Grand Noble boarded a horse carriage to return home that night. Seeing Yaku sitting timidly in the carriage reminded him of his son's image as a child, when he himself was the one who had passed on pharmacist knowledge to him. Being a pharmacist required not only knowledge, but also a kind heart to accompany one's patients. That was Bruno's working principle. But it wasn't until his son was struck by lightning that he realized he had been too concerned with patients and hadn't done anything for his own son. By now, Bruno was certain that the person before him was not his son. Upon reaching the mansion gate, Yaku finally dared to call out to him. From his case, he took out a pre-prepared vial of medicine, hoping his father would also use his medicine. Bruno immediately accepted it because his son was blessed by the medicine deity. If this was the deity's will, he would comply. Yaku heard this and immediately denied it, saying he was just an ordinary apprentice pharmacist, even with this power. It was Bruno who had taught him how to face a dying patient and how to comfort them. Bruno had enlightened him on that. Yaku extended his hand before Bruno, forming a promise between father and son that from now on, he hoped to pursue the path of medicine with him, helping those in need all over this world. It had been 3 months since Yaku took responsibility for examining the Empress. He and Bruno had begun exchanging medical knowledge. At this point, Bruno told Yaku something. People from Nova Medical University were urging him to provide the formula for the White Death cure. Since this was Yaku's achievement, he had given them a very reasonable explanation. It was the power of the deity, so even if they knew, they couldn't compound it. Hearing this, Yaku immediately denied it, saying that medicine was created without using divine magic, and one day he would share that medicine with the whole world. There was one more thing Bruno needed to remind Yaku about the White Death disease. This time he suspected someone had brought the disease into the palace, targeting the Empress to overthrow her. Yaku didn't think so because this was a contagious disease. Bringing the disease into the palace and directly targeting the Empress would be very difficult. Saying this, it was time for the Empress's checkup. So Yaku stood up and asked to leave first. Bruno remained seated, reading Yaku's formula sheets and breaking out in a sweat, not knowing how long it would take him to reach this level. Yaku entered the palace and met Prince Noah standing in front of the Empress's room. Before allowing Yaku to examine his mother, Noah pulled Yaku aside and revealed some very interesting news. The Empress was considering a great reward for Yaku's contribution this time. Yaku's blank reaction wasn't at all what Noah had imagined, causing the boy to become annoyed and shout at Yaku, reminding him that his contribution was very significant, so being rewarded was natural. He was telling Yaku in advance so he would have time to prepare. Then Noah leaned in curiously and questioned Yaku about what he would wish for: money, power, or territory. Yaku just smiled and denied those things. He didn't need any of them. Of course, Noah wouldn't believe it. What noble wouldn't want power? The boy tried to pry out Yaku's wish, promising not to tell anyone. A wish? At this moment, Yaku truly thought about his wish and told Noah that if possible, he wanted to open a pharmacy that didn't discriminate between nobles and commoners, rich or poor. He would examine everyone. Yaku's treatment for the Empress took place afterward. Compared to 3 months ago, her complexion was now much better, making Yaku sigh with relief. Finally, the medicine had started to take effect. The Empress heard this and immediately laughed, saying Yaku was being too modest. She felt certain she was getting healthier day by day. Recalling that evening lying in bed, she seemed to have accepted her death was very near, and Yaku's confident assertions at that time had ignited a flame of hope within her. Thinking of that day made the Empress sad. Once she died, her power and existence would all fall into the past, which was terrifying. The Empress wondered if a person who had stood at the edge of death, losing their value, was still worthy of ruling the empire. Yaku immediately refuted this, saying that would never happen. In all circumstances, even the worst, those who needed the Empress would still be her sons and daughters, so at least in her capacity as a mother, the Empress would never lose her value. Additionally, in this empire, there were many citizens who needed her. As long as they existed, the Empress remained very important. The Empress heard this and immediately laughed, saying Yaku's way of speaking was indeed pleasing to the ear. For her, Yaku's words of comfort just now were like a medicine for the soul. The examination was over, and Yaku stood up to ask permission to leave. Then he inadvertently reminded the Empress of one more thing: a person who seemed to have died but was able to overcome it and continue living. This would indeed be her second life, and life would definitely become more beautiful for the Empress. Some time later, the Empress's tuberculosis was completely cured. She returned to her daily work and summoned Grand Noble Bruno for an audience. This time she summoned him regarding his son. The Empress had planned a generous reward for Yaku. Just a few days later, Bruno led Yaku into the palace. Yaku followed his father, feeling a bit anxious about such a formal ceremony, wondering if he was qualified to participate. So Bruno immediately enlightened his son, saying that as his son, Yaku should be confident in his position. Entering the ceremony, the beautiful Empress Elizabeth appeared before all the ministers. The ceremony began, and the first person to be rewarded was Grand Noble Bruno. He had made great contributions in treating her and nurturing the next generation. For this great achievement, he was rewarded with a vast territory, which made all the ministers envious. Right after Bruno, the Empress called for Yaku. He nervously approached and paid respects before the Empress. The Empress decreed that Yaku be promoted directly from apprentice pharmacist to royal pharmacist for his contribution, and additionally, she granted him the special privilege of opening a pharmacy in the imperial capital. Yaku was very surprised by the benefits he had received, turning around only to see Noah smiling. Perhaps Noah had told the Empress about his wish. As soon as the decree was issued, the very next day Yaku had to receive a team of skilled carpenters at his home. They had come under the Empress's orders to help Yaku construct the pharmacy, which surprised Yaku greatly because he hadn't yet thought of any ideas for his pharmacy. At this moment, Ellen unexpectedly entered the room. She had come under Grand Noble Bruno's orders to assist Yaku in opening a pharmacy. Seeing that Yaku was still very hesitant, Ellen reminded him that there was no need to deliberate further. Yaku could just build arbitrarily. If he didn't like it, he could rebuild, as everything would be funded by the Empress. So Yaku began to draw the design. Yaku's design was drawn very meticulously, making it much easier for the carpentry team. Yaku walked around to check the situation, and the supervisor ran after him, wanting to ask about the pharmacy's name for the signboard. For the name, Yaku had already envisioned it before. He had planned to use his family name for the pharmacy, but after reconsidering, he changed his mind. This was Yaku's dream pharmacy, so he didn't want to use his family name. Yaku thought for a while and then smiled, realizing that his pharmacy was in another world. So, Otherworld Pharmacy sounded kind of cool. Before Yaku could finish considering, the supervisor had already ordered his subordinates to prepare the signboard immediately. And just a moment later, the Otherworld Pharmacy signboard was completed. Ellen ran over to praise Yaku, saying the name sounded very good and would save the trouble of having to advertise. But Yaku didn't find it good at all. He just wanted his start to be a bit quieter. At this moment, a gray-bearded man came to chat. He introduced himself as Biran, the head of the Royal Pharmacists Association, wanting to meet the owner of this large pharmacy. So Yaku stepped forward to respond to him. After just a few sentences, Biran had already started to mock Yaku, suggesting he was selling candy, which made Ellen a bit uncomfortable. She was about to stand up for Yaku, but was stopped by him. Yaku still smiled and responded to him, saying indeed his pharmacy did sell things like candy. This made Biran burst into laughter, after which he began to discuss prices here. A pharmacy established by a noble would, according to him, have very high prices. Yaku heard this and immediately denied it, saying he would sell medicine at low prices. Of course, Biran wouldn't believe that. How much would Yaku's cheap be for commoners? Hearing this, Ellen couldn't stand it anymore and shouted in his face, saying there was no need to beat around the bush. If he intended to obstruct this pharmacy, then she herself would be his opponent. Ellen's momentum was so strong that it frightened Baran, who found an excuse to leave immediately. Afterward, Yaku and Ellen went inside to carefully inspect the pharmacy. Ellen had already helped him prepare all the tools for compounding and everything else. Yaku began to calculate that he and Ellen could both sell medicine and compound it, so they needed one more person to do accounting. Lot volunteered to do that job immediately, but since Lot was only 9 years old, Yaku couldn't let her do such a big job, so he assigned Lot some small tasks in the pharmacy. Ellen also felt this was reasonable because with Lot there, the atmosphere in the pharmacy would be much more cheerful. That evening, when Yaku returned to the mansion, he saw some servants crying about something. He curiously ran over to inquire and received a thank you from Uncle Cedric. Because his leg had been injured, he could no longer continue his accounting work in the Grand Noble's mansion, and the master had allowed him to return to his hometown to retire. Everyone was very sad because Cedric had worked there for a very long time, and they didn't want to part with him at all. So Yaku immediately came up with an idea. He would treat Cedric's leg and then have him do the accounting work for his pharmacy. After that, Yaku ran to ask his father's permission. He agreed immediately and ordered the butler to bring in a large chest containing a lot of gold. Opening a pharmacy would be very expensive, so this was a small token of parental love for their child. Thus, Yaku had an accountant for his pharmacy. A few days later, his pharmacy officially opened. Yaku and all the staff stood in front of the door. Beside Yaku for his speech, the slogan of the Otherworld Pharmacy was not to discriminate between nobles and commoners, rich and poor. Here he would sell medicine to all who needed it. Although some people still thought Yaku was young and playing house with his family's reputation, not yet believing in his abilities. Overall, the opening of Yaku's pharmacy went very well. Yaku's pharmacy had been open for a month but still had no customers. Yaku was a bit puzzled by this, but Ellen found it very normal because commoners usually went to commoners' pharmacies, and when nobles needed something, they would directly summon pharmacists to their mansions. There was no need to go all the way to a pharmacy. Yaku could only smile wryly and comfort himself, seeming that his pharmacy still had a very long way to go to reach the people. Ellen continued to explain a few more reasons for Yaku to understand. Royal Pharmacist had always been a rare title. This pharmacy was opened by the son of the Grand Noble, so it was very normal for people to feel hesitant. Uncle Cedric also began to worry about how to get customers now. Yaku's wish was to sell medicine to those who needed it, but this seemed to be the most difficult goal for him to approach. At this moment, Lot excitedly ran into the room to show them that she had surveyed the people in the city and compiled all the reasons why they didn't come to his pharmacy. Lot began her presentation. She had filtered out several questions that people most often answered. First, they were afraid of the royal seal. Next, they were afraid of speaking improperly to a noble. After that, they didn't have decent clothes to enter such a royal pharmacy. Yaku wasn't particular about any of these things at all. Lot thought it was because the 2 knights guarding the gate outside were too scary, so people didn't dare to come. Another issue, which seemed to be the most essential, was that they worried the medicine prices here would be very expensive. Initially, to make medicine available to all people, Yaku had established a rule of negotiable pricing. He would sell cheaply to the poor and expensively to the rich. But this very rule had created a barrier between him and his patients, making Yaku have to think of another solution at this moment. Mr. Cedric thought Yaku should post listed prices at the entrance, but Lot didn't think this solution was good because most people couldn't read. Even if they posted a price list, they wouldn't know what it was. So Yaku and everyone had to discuss to come up with a new solution. In the following days, Yaku's store remained extremely empty, with only one old man, Jean, as a regular customer, coming every day to buy a few candies. This type of candy was used to provide vitamin C, so Yaku also guessed that he was a sailor fishing at sea. When Yaku curiously asked, Jean changed the subject and left immediately. Yaku didn't suspect much and went outside to get some fresh air, but then encountered him standing with 2 others who looked like nobles. At this moment, 2 disguised people called out to Yaku. Although they were wearing masks, there was no way Yaku wouldn't recognize his own parents. After that, he led them both inside the store to receive them. Yaku's mother was a bit sad. She had gone to the trouble of disguising herself, yet was revealed too quickly, which wasn't fun at all. This was disguise. She only wore an additional mask, making Yaku smile. After that, Bruno asked Yaku's permission to take a tour around the store. So Yaku became a guide for his parents. First, the ground floor was the main part of the store, where there were display rooms, compounding rooms, and reception rooms. The second floor was for treating patients, with a total of 4 beds and 1 separate room. The third floor was where the staff and Yaku rested, and seeing a kitchen there made his mother very pleased. The fourth floor was reserved exclusively for Yaku. He used this place to research new medicines. After a complete tour, Bruno confirmed that this was a good store with adequate facilities. They returned to the restroom, and the next issue Bruno addressed was customers. He knew very well that noble customers wouldn't come here, so that only left commoner customers. This was exactly the issue that Yaku wanted to hear his advice on. Yaku curiously asked Bruno if there was any way they could feel comfortable entering his pharmacy. Hearing this, Yaku's mother immediately came up with an idea for him. In her opinion, Yaku should sell cosmetics first. Nobles loved beauty. If Yaku could sell an inexpensive cosmetic to nobles, then commoners would also pay attention to his products. Bruno also agreed with her initiative. However, he had to specifically remind Yaku not to sell white powder. Previously, Yaku had collaborated as a cosmetic safety guarantor, so he knew very well about this white powder, which was created from many metal components. So when using it, people would have reduced lifespans. Another thing to note was that nowadays, women wanted their skin to become fair and bright. So they often used the method of expanding veins, just to become beautiful but harming their own bodies. To Bruno, this went against their purpose, a very foolish measure. At this moment, Yaku received an order. A man rushed in saying his young lady had fallen ill and wanted to invite Yaku to treat her. Yaku asked his parents' permission and immediately left. He boarded the carriage. Young lady Chloe with a pale face looked at Yaku, but she was still conscious, so it wasn't too serious yet. Yaku activated his medicine eye to diagnose her condition. He immediately discovered cuts on her arm. This was exactly the vein expansion technique. Yaku then explained to Chloe that she wasn't sick at all, but because she kept expanding her veins like this, she had a high chance of getting infected. Then Yaku invited Chloe to his store so he could prescribe medicine. Sitting in the store, Chloe tearfully told her troubles to Yaku. She had been rejected by the man she loved because he only liked girls with fair, bright skin. Seeing the girl crying so miserably, Yaku had to prescribe her a medicine and told her to return in a week. He would prepare a cosmetic that matched her wishes. In the following days, Yaku began to compound cosmetics. He had to test them on himself first. Knowing that Yaku would create white powder, but to be this white surprised even Ellen. Yaku already had a product to replace those unsafe procedures, so he planned that the next time he met the Empress, he would ask her to ban those dangerous products. Exactly 1 week later, Sister Chloe came to Yaku's store to receive the goods. Yaku led her inside and explained each step of use to her. This wasn't a powder cosmetic, but a cream-type cosmetic, which not only made the skin fair, but also had sun protection effects. Next was a type of highlighting powder. Ellen stepped forward to apply it on Chloe's face, and immediately her skin began to shine. Just a moment later, when the beauty treatment was completed, looking at herself in the mirror, Chloe couldn't believe that her face skin could be so bright, smooth, and soft. It was completely different from the previous cosmetics she had used. And finally, a makeup remover, used before Chloe went to sleep, would make her skin increasingly brighter. Chloe received the cosmetic set and burst into tears. Using this, she wouldn't have to suffer the pain of expanding veins anymore. After that came a series of promotional activities for the new cosmetic line of the Otherworld Pharmacy. Lot took a basket outside the store to invite people to try it. A cosmetic used by nobles yet very affordable, so this item was extremely popular with the ladies. Just a moment later, Yaku's store was crowded with customers. Indeed, no rumor spreads faster than word of mouth. Seeing Yaku's store crowded with customers, male customers were also curious and came to try the service. Sister Chloe also brought her close friend to support. But due to the sudden surge in customers, Yaku couldn't produce fast enough to meet the demand. So Sister Chloe immediately came up with a business cooperation. She wanted Yaku to open his own exclusive cosmetic company, and she would be the investor in this business. It sounded like Yaku would be the only one to benefit, so he turned to ask Uncle Cedric's opinion, and he also saw it as very beneficial for Yaku. Being able to do business with the Chatelain family was a very fortunate thing. The paperwork would be handled by Mr. Cedric, so Yaku only needed to agree. Thus, a few days later, Yaku's cosmetic store was completed. Sister Chloe even hired top cosmetic pharmacists for Yaku. Thanks to everyone's efforts, when the next team meeting took place, Lot's reports received a shower of praise from users, further motivating Yaku to develop the Otherworld pharmacy even more. Yaku was summoned to the palace by the Empress. Having new cosmetics but not letting her use them first made the Empress a bit upset with Yaku. To console the Empress, Yaku gave her a new product, after which he and the Empress discussed that dangerous vein expansion solution. After consideration, the Empress decided to ban the use of that solution throughout the empire. One more thing, she wanted Yaku to increase the prices of medicines and cosmetics. His medicine prices were too low, and other merchants wouldn't be able to continue doing business, which would cause the empire's economy to decline. She also wanted Yaku to share the method of making the new cosmetics. Yaku couldn't monopolize the country's cosmetics industry. Yaku heard this and immediately agreed because he had already intended to share the method for a long time. Having received the reward, they had to go and inspect it. Bruno led Yaku to the Marseille territory to observe the situation. This was a very large territory, bestowed by the Empress to Bruno when he had contributed to treating her illness. This place was a major port of the empire, likened to the main gate into the empire, and was also a very large medicinal herb growing area. The inheritance value of this region for Yaku was very large. Bruno was now listening to all the issues reported by the former lord. Everything was developing very stably, except for one issue that had been giving the lord a headache these days. It was about the East Idon Trade Association from the Kingdom of Nedale. They were using that kingdom's authority as a shield to avoid being taxed. Bruno looked through it for a while and made a decision. He wanted to hear their wishes first before considering the next step. If possible, he wanted to lower the tax a bit. That way, the situation would improve. At this point, he turned to look at Yaku, and the lord immediately understood his intention and tipped Yaku that the sea of this territory was very beautiful. Yaku should go there to play for a bit. Knowing that staying here wouldn't accomplish anything, Yaku left immediately. Stepping out to the beach, he already saw Blanche and Lot building a sand castle there. Seeing Yaku arrive, Blanche grabbed his hand, acting cute and asking Yaku to let her play in the sea for a bit. Lot, seeing this, immediately joined in, promising Yaku she would keep a very close eye on the young mistress. The two begged so intensely that Yaku had to agree, but they could only get wet up to their feet and not go too far. Ellen was also present. Seeing the two kids so happy, she also wanted to go down and play in the seawater. Ellen invited Yaku to come down with her, but he refused, just sitting on the shore watching Blanche. Watching the little girl, Yaku remembered his sister from his past. When he was in the old world, every year Yaku would go to the beach to play. His sister also wanted to go down to the sea to play in the water, but because she was too young, Yaku couldn't agree. So to appease her, Yaku had promised that when she turned 5 years old, he would let her play in the sea. The two siblings hooked their fingers together in promise, but then his sister was discovered to have a serious illness, and Yaku's promise could no longer be fulfilled. Thinking of this, Yaku suddenly heard Lot scream. The sea waves were pulling Blanche away. Without thinking much, Yaku immediately rushed into the sea to save Blanche. But because this was a reverse current, Blanche was being pulled further and further away. The little girl began to tire and sink slowly. Yaku couldn't accept losing his sister once more. The current was too strong. Even if Yaku dived down, it would be difficult to catch up with Blanche. At this moment, a thought flashed in Yaku's mind. If only the seawater didn't exist, he would catch up with Blanche. Immediately, the holy seal on Yaku's hand glowed, and then in the middle of the sea appeared a large round hole with no seawater inside at all. Ellen rubbed her eyes, waking up and staring blankly at the scene before her. She had thought Yaku used divine magic to push the seawater elsewhere, but upon closer inspection, she saw that wasn't the case. Where she was standing was the seabed, and the sand was extremely dry, which wasn't right at all. Ellen broke out in a cold sweat. What on earth had Yaku done? After that, Yaku brought the two of them to shore. Blanche woke up and burst into tears, frightened, hugging Yaku. He comforted the little girl while activating his medicine eye to check Blanche. Fortunately, the little girl hadn't swallowed any seawater, so she was fine. At this moment, Ellen spoke up, questioning what Yaku had just done. Yaku wasn't very clear about this either. He thought he had activated the Yin divine magic, but Ellen didn't think so. Yaku had just erased a large area of the sea. No divine magic could do such a thing. Lot heard this and broke out in a sweat. To lighten the heavy atmosphere, Ellen immediately praised Yaku. What he had just done was wonderful. Her divine magic to save Blanche earlier was completely powerless. It was Yaku who had saved his sister himself. That night, sitting on the bed, Yaku kept recalling the scene from the afternoon. When he wanted to save Blanche, he only intended to erase the seawater, but unexpectedly, everything there was completely erased by him. The human body is 70% water. If Yaku had made a mistake at that time, Blanche and Ellen would have been in danger. At this moment, Lot spoke up, calling Yaku and wanting to revisit the incident from the tide. Yaku had thought Lot was very afraid of his divine magic at that time. But no, what Lot feared was that she herself couldn't protect her young mistress. Seeing this, Yaku encouraged Lot. She didn't know how to swim, so even if she went down, she wouldn't have been able to save Blanche anyway. On the contrary, Lot's action at that time was correct. Although Lot wasn't his sister, Yaku still considered Lot a part of his family. It was fortunate that she was still safe. Lot was moved, kneeling down to thank Yaku. His words of encouragement made her feel redeemed. Meanwhile, a strange cult had learned about Yaku using divine magic to erase a sea area, plus the fact that he had no shadow. To them, Yaku was a heretic, and they had gathered forces to hunt for Yaku, determined to eliminate him at all costs. The trip to Marseille had ended, and Yaku's otherworld pharmacy returned to operation. They had only closed for a week, but Yaku's customers had already tripled, making both Yaku and Ellen break out in a sweat. This number of customers would likely make them have to work overtime again. At this moment, Yaku noticed two people wearing white clothes whispering something. He cheerfully approached them, wanting to give advice, but they only glared at Yaku and left immediately. Thinking about it, Yaku still found the two men very suspicious. Ellen and Lot felt the same way. Even before Yaku, Lot had approached them wanting to advise, but they ignored her, only paying attention to Yaku. So for safety, Yaku made a new decision: to have the night team outside be more vigilant, as they couldn't let such elements affect other customers. The next morning, as the night-changing shifts had just opened the pharmacy door, from within the fog, a mad horse pulling a cart full of soil rushed straight inside. The news was reported to Grand Noble Bruno immediately, which made him very angry. This action was considered a declaration of war against his family. The Grand Noble ordered the knight to report to the Empress, then turned to ask Yaku if he had noticed anyone suspicious. According to Yaku's speculation, it could only be the Pharmacist Association or the two men in white from yesterday. But since there was no evidence yet, he couldn't conclude at this moment and wanted to seek more accurate information. After that, Yaku rushed to inspect the pharmacy. Uncle Cedric was very troubled by what had happened. The entire store was flooded with stinking mud. Although he had tried to use divine magic to purify the air, this amount of mud couldn't be transported away immediately. In misfortune, there was fortune. Only the first floor of the pharmacy suffered damage, while the upper floors were still fine. Lot and Ellen had already moved some of the pharmacy's medicines to Yaku's mansion, so the loss this time wasn't too great. At this moment, Mr. Jean led a group of his friends to come. Knowing that Yaku was having problems, he came to help him. Not only Jean's group, but people from the surrounding area also rushed to help Yaku clean up. Everyone was very indignant about the perpetrator of this incident. Although they weren't being paid, they were still enthusiastic about helping Yaku. Being loved by so many people to this extent made Yaku extremely touched. He and Mr. Cedric bowed their heads to thank everyone. Suddenly, a lady hurriedly ran over, calling for Yaku. She burst into tears, telling Yaku that her father had suddenly fainted under the sun and wouldn't wake up no matter how she tried to rouse him. So Yaku handed over all the affairs at the store to Uncle Cedric and followed the lady to save the person. To be safe, Yaku had brought all types of medicine for first aid. But the further they went, the more he felt something wasn't quite right. This lady was leading him very far from the imperial capital. By the time Yaku turned back to ask, the lady had disappeared. Immediately after, countless people wearing white appeared, surrounding Yaku. They were judges from the Holy Kingdom, especially coming here to clarify the matter of Yaku having no shadow and erasing the sea at Marseille. In his lessons with Ellen, Yaku had learned more about the Divine Temple, which was the origin of deities and divine magic in this world, and moreover was the world's largest religious organization. They had the task of assessing divine magic in newborns, then nurturing them. Teaching this, Yaku recalled what Lot had once mentioned to him. A noble without divine magic would be demoted to a commoner. Not only that, the Divine Temple was also the one who bestowed crowns and divine staffs to the monarchs of each country. with power even exceeding that of a kingdom. Regarding the Divine Temple, Ellen had to specifically remind Yaku to be careful of the Heresy Investigation Bureau, which was a group specialized in eliminating heretics and evil spirits who used divine magic for evil deeds. The army of this organization was known to be powerful and brutal. Yet now Yaku was facing Salomon, the director of the Heresy Investigation Bureau, a person without a shadow daring to open a large pharmacy in the middle of the city, then coming and going in broad daylight. Salomon didn't know whether Yaku was stupid or confident. Yaku could only force a smile, trying to explain to him that he wasn't an evil spirit, just a human. Of course, Salomon wouldn't believe Yaku's words. He ordered Yaku to put down his belongings and step back. Not wanting to make a bigger issue, Yaku had to comply. Salomon had prepared an evil spirit containment formation to capture Yaku. But when the divine magic formation was deployed, in just the blink of an eye, it disappeared immediately. This startled the entire Heresy investigation team. One of them grabbed his staff and rushed forward, shooting fire to surround Yaku. Yaku remained very calm, creating nitrogen to form a firewall for himself, then removing oxygen from the air to extinguish the fire. If fire had no effect, then what about ice? They shot the ice sword dance towards Yaku, but just by touching the wall Yaku had created, it immediately vanished. This ability made the entire investigation team break out in a sweat. They believed Yaku's divine magic was multi-attribute, too dangerous to capture alive anymore, and must be eliminated immediately. The entire investigation team, following Salomon's orders, began to set up a formation to attack Yaku, each person with one attribute continuously firing at him. The 5 elements of Earth launched a combined attack on Yaku, but after a massive explosion, Yaku was still unharmed. He had managed to create a giant ice wall to block all the attacks. By this point, Yaku was also a bit annoyed. He emanated powerful energy, frightening Salomon, who hurriedly called everyone to set up a defensive formation. But it was too late. The power emanating from Yaku made him stagger and fall from his horse, while others rushed to help him. At this moment, Yaku had lifted the entire giant ice block into the sky, threatening them. He demanded they stop immediately. He had come to this world not to fight, but to save people, and if they still wanted to continue, he would retaliate. Yaku's entire body glowed brilliantly, making Salomon break out in a sweat as he realized unlimited divine power, a holy seal on the shoulder, Yaku having no shadow because he was already light. Salomon couldn't believe he would meet this person here. He shouted loudly, reminding all his comrades that Yaku was the manifestation of the medicine deity. The entire group immediately prostrated themselves, admitting their sin to Yaku. Salomon, after the fall from his horse earlier, had a severely bleeding leg. This blasphemy against the deity was a crime, so he decided to commit suicide to atone to Yaku. Salomon drew his knife and was about to kill himself when Yaku stopped him. He had said from the beginning that he came here to save people. If they didn't bother him and his store, then no one had to die. After that, Yaku activated his medicine eye to diagnose Salomon. The fall from the horse earlier had caused him an open fracture. The light emitted was white, indicating Yaku could still treat it. The optimal method would be to amputate this limb of Salomon, but at this moment, a red light was emitted, making Yaku reassess. If he amputated the man's limb now, it would cause blood infection. Yaku had to switch to another treatment method. Performing surgery to set the bone would be more feasible, but in this world, there was no concept of surgery. Only Yaku could do that. Yaku hesitated a bit, not knowing if he could do it well. After deliberating for a while, Yaku ordered the others to call for a horse carriage. He created a stone platform and had Salomon lie on it. Yaku had made his decision. As a doctor, he couldn't leave him like this. He had to perform surgery on him. Yaku entered the minor surgery room and began administering anesthesia to Salomon. The man was willing to follow all of Yaku's instructions, so he didn't complain at all. Previously, Yaku had performed experimental surgeries on animals, but this was the first time he was doing it on a human body. He was a bit worried. Yaku took a deep breath and began working. Without him, no one could save Salomon. After some time, Yaku came out. Currently, Salomon's life had been saved, but he still needed more time for treatment, so Yaku would let the others take him back first. Instead of punishing, Yaku had shown mercy. The entire group immediately prostrated themselves, thanking the medicine deity. Yaku immediately denied this, saying very clearly that he wasn't the medicine deity or anything. He was just a person carrying the will of a doctor. Saving Salomon was what he needed to do. Instead, if they wanted to thank him, Yaku hoped they would keep today's matter a secret. Many months later, Salomon had fully recovered and personally came to Yaku's pharmacy to give a gift. After that incident, Salomon had devoted all his strength to achieve the position of Archbishop of the Divine Temple. From now on, he promised Yaku that any news related to heresy originating here, he would find ways to suppress it for him. After that, he asked Yaku for a bit of time, so Yaku had to close the pharmacy at midday for a while. Lot, holding the cake Salomon had given, looked for a corner to eat it secretly, but little Blanche was already calling from outside the gate. This afternoon, she had an appointment to play with Yaku, so she arrived a bit early. Inside the pharmacy at this moment, Salomon had brought out a very luxurious box. Inside was a staff, and he wanted to give it to Yaku. This staff was called the Medicine Deity Staff. Besides the 5 basic attributes, it could help Yaku fight as well as treat others. Yaku didn't know if he should accept such a valuable thing, but seeing Salomon so enthusiastic, he took it and tried it. Immediately, the staff emitted brilliant light. To Salomon, this was a sign that the divine staff had accepted Yaku as its master. The staff was so beautiful that Ellen was captivated, so Yaku let her hold it. But somehow it fell right through Ellen's hand. Salomon immediately explained that the divine staff didn't belong to this world. Only Yaku could use it. Yaku quickly picked up the staff. Then he noticed several buttons on the staff body. So he turned and curiously asked Salomon if the staff had the ability to fly. Yaku's guess was completely correct. As long as Yaku transmitted a bit of divine power into the staff, it immediately flew up, strong enough to carry Yaku into the sky as well. After the meeting, Yaku saw Salomon off to the door. Before leaving, he still had one more gift for Yaku, a necklace. This was an item to help Yaku control his magic power. Just by wearing it, Yaku would have a shadow like a normal person. This was exactly what Yaku needed, so he didn't stand on ceremony and accepted the gift right away. After that, Yaku took Lot and his sister Blanche for a walk in the city. Whatever his sister wanted, Yaku bought it all. Seeing the two of them so happy made Yaku happy too. Thus, the incident with the Heresy Investigation Bureau had ended, and Yaku's store returned to normal operations. According to Yaku's calculations, the number of customers showed signs of increasing further, so it was also time for him to recruit more staff. Noble pharmacists seemed rather rare, and common pharmacists all worked for the Pharmacists Association already. At this moment, Yaku accidentally overheard some complaints from the people. Because his pharmacy was always crowded with customers, and not everyone could wait in line, they had gone to other pharmacies to buy medicines. But since Yaku's pharmacy wasn't under the management of the Pharmacists Association, what Yaku sold couldn't appear in the pharmacies managed by the Pharmacists Association. So Yaku had understood the problem. It was the Pharmacists Association that was the major barrier preventing his medicine from reaching the people. To solve this problem, Yaku came up with an idea. He discussed with Ellen about establishing a new association. Currently, his store along with the cosmetic shop was managed by him. According to the Empire's legal system, they could completely establish a new association. Once that was done, Yaku would attract other pharmacies to join his association, and from there reduce the overload at the main facility. Thinking and doing immediately, Yaku handed over the task of paperwork to Mr. Cedric, and as for obtaining permission, perhaps Yaku would make a trip to the palace to ask the Empress. Yaku's Otherworld pharmacy was growing day by day, forcing old Baran to hold an emergency meeting with the Pharmacists Association. A pharmacy from a noble family selling too cheaply, to the extent that even the poor could afford it, was something Baran couldn't stand anymore. This time, he had decided to resolve the Otherworld pharmacy at all costs to regain their customer base. He even forbade members of the association from having any contact with the Otherworld pharmacy. If they broke the rule, they would have their business license revoked and be expelled from the Pharmacists Association. Early the next morning, Pierre frantically brought his daughter Mary to pharmacist Donald's store seeking help, but knocked on the door for a long time without anyone opening it. His daughter was very ill. Coincidentally, at this time, Yaku and Lot were passing by, so he invited Pierre, if he didn't mind, to come to his pharmacy, and he would examine the little girl. Unable to let his daughter suffer any longer, Pierre silently followed Yaku. In front of the Otherworld pharmacy was a long line of people buying medicine, but Yaku didn't lead him through the main gate. Instead, he led him through a side gate. This made Pierre a bit sad. He thought Yaku was discriminating against him, but no, until Yaku gave him a mask. He realized Yaku was leading him through the side entrance to prevent others from being infected by little Mary. Both of them put on masks, and Yaku began examining little Mary. First, Yaku needed some information about the little girl. Currently, Mary had a very high fever, plus dehydration, and was not lucid. Yaku couldn't yet determine what this disease was. At this point, he asked Pierre what Mary's weight was. Seeing the man look puzzled, Yaku had to bring out a scale to try measuring. He asked Pierre to have little Mary step on the scale. But since this was the first time he had seen such a thing, he was still a bit afraid. So Yaku explained to him that weight was necessary for him to estimate the amount of medicine to decoct for Mary. If it was too much, it wouldn't be effective. Conversely, it could cause side effects. This surprised Pierre greatly because according to other clinics, when prescribing for children, they defaulted to half the adult dosage, not as careful as at Yaku's clinic. After a while of examining little Mary, Yaku had confirmed her disease. Mary was indeed suffering from a severe cold. Pierre was startled, unable to believe it. The little girl had such a high fever, plus convulsions and foaming at the mouth, making him think it wasn't a cold but a possession by an evil spirit. Yaku, however, confirmed that this was indeed a cold, also known as the flu. Seeing that Pierre still didn't understand, Yaku had to explain further. Little Mary was infected by a virus causing a cold. Yaku stood up and went to the medicine cabinet to take out a bottle of medicine for this disease. He further explained that currently, Mary's body was very weak. Taking medicine wouldn't be very effective, so he decided to use the smoke inhalation method for Mary. Just by making the little girl's body heat up, those viruses would also weaken, thereby creating opportunities for the cells in the little girl's body to resist this type of virus. Despite all the explanations, Pierre didn't understand anything, so Yaku stopped there. He left him to take care of his daughter and went on to his next tasks. The treatment continued until late in the evening. Yaku's method had indeed been effective. Mary's fever had subsided very quickly. Yaku had also prepared medicine for the little girl for the next 5 days. Although it was already late at night, he still had to remind Pierre that this type of disease often flared up in the evening, so if Mary still had any problems, he wouldn't mind examining her again. Yaku saw Pierre off to the gate. At this moment, he curiously asked about the examination fee. Yaku just smiled and gave a very low price, using the reason that examining children was very easy, so he only charged that much for the service. After that, Yaku said goodbye to Pierre and left. Looking at the Otherworld pharmacy store, Pierre now understood. The Pharmacists Association had no chance to compete with Yaku. Returning home, Pierre buried himself in work. At this moment, his wife entered the room and reported that their daughter was sleeping very soundly, seemingly no longer in any pain. After learning that Pierre had taken Mary to the Otherworld pharmacy, she had been very worried because the Pharmacists Association had decided not to go there. Pierre didn't think so. If it hadn't been for Yaku's help today, their daughter wouldn't have survived. He had to share honestly that from knowledge to care for patients, the Otherworld pharmacy was completely superior to their Pharmacists Association. This was the image that a pharmacist should have. Thinking of this, Pierre felt himself to be very inadequate. He was a commoner without divine magic and didn't have profound knowledge like Yaku. So if he could be passed on a bit of Yaku's experience, perhaps he could also go save others like him. Pierre's wife understood what he wanted to mention, but if Pierre wanted to do so, wouldn't they have to confront the Pharmacists Association? Going against the association's policy was no different than suicide. There were too many difficulties, making Pierre burst into tears. He felt so helpless, bearing the name of a pharmacist, yet when his daughter fell ill, he couldn't do anything. The next morning, the Pharmacists Association had another emergency meeting. The revenue of the stores and the association continued to decline sharply. Baran was very angry but couldn't do anything because the Otherworld pharmacy had the Empress's backing, and in recent days, the Archbishop had also been frequently visiting there, so wasn't it already invincible? Saying this, he asked Pierre, since his store was closest to the Otherworld pharmacy. Pierre clenched his teeth, took a deep breath, then stood up to share honestly. If anyone sitting here had never been to the Otherworld pharmacy, they should go there once, and they would realize why customers weren't returning to their stores. That place was different from theirs, a place selling medicine without discriminating between nobles and the poor, where everyone was treated equally and appropriately. Baran angrily slammed the table and refuted, believing it was just customer curiosity about new things. To him, the Otherworld pharmacy was doing completely wrong. They were taking advantage of the Empress's special privilege to arbitrarily lower prices, causing their Pharmacists Association to shake. Saying this, Baran burst into tears. For so many years, they had been the ones supplying medicine to commoners, while nobles didn't care or help them at all. Just think, if one day that pharmacy disappeared, then the treatment facilities for commoners would also collapse. Pierre was still trying to explain to everyone that it was precisely because the Otherworld pharmacy was outstanding that, instead of eliminating them, they should learn from them. Learn to be able to treat and sell medicine to people properly, rather than selling types of medicine with unclear origins, not knowing whether they were effective for patients or not. Biron slammed very hard on the table, stopping Pierre. If he didn't believe in the Pharmacists Association, he could completely leave right now. So Pierre had lost his job, and his pharmacy was also destroyed by Biron's men. Pierre could only helplessly watch, unable to do anything. At this moment, Yaku suddenly appeared. He immediately ran over to ask about him. By this point, Pierre didn't hide anything from Yaku anymore. He told Yaku everything that had happened. The fact that he had ignored the association's regulations and brought Mary to his pharmacy for examination had angered Biron, who revoked all of his business licenses. Initially, when Pierre spoke out, he had hoped that the association could recognize and change their business method, but in the end, he had nothing left. Being expelled from the association meant he couldn't do business here anymore, so Pierre had planned to go to another country and start over. Hearing this, Yaku understood. So Pierre just needed to join another association, and he would be able to do business again. Coincidentally, today Yaku had been granted permission by the Empress to establish a pharmacists association. For Yaku, this would be an association specializing in compounding and processing new types of medicine. Yaku extended his hand, inviting Pierre, if he didn't mind, to help him. Pierre immediately burst into tears. He had a new job in this country. Very quickly, his store was redecorated, with medicine stocked full on the shelves. Before opening for the grand opening, he was still very worried, not knowing if he could do well. At this moment, little Mary ran over, pulling his pants to encourage him. Thanks to this, he had gained his determination and confidence. The pharmacy door was opened. In front of him was a group of people waiting for him to open. They had heard that this pharmacy was affiliated with the Otherworld pharmacy, so they had come here to avoid having to queue. For the first time in his life, Pierre welcomed so many customers, and he inadvertently burst into tears. From now on, he could sell the best types of medicine to the people. Bruno once had a friend named Camus. One fine day, he was punished by the Divine Temple for cruel experiments on humans. Even while under investigation, in front of Bruno, Camus remained defiant and scolded Bruno in return. To him, Bruno would never understand the truth of this world. Humans all had to die anyway, but weren't they constantly creating more humans? Losing a few humans for experiments wouldn't cause the world to perish. That was the inherent beauty of this world. At this point, Bruno startled awake. He had just dreamed of all the events that had happened before with his friend Camus. Until now, Bruno still couldn't understand why Camus had to go that far. The next morning, Yaku's family was having breakfast. Sitting at the dining table, seeing Bruno being absent-minded made Yaku think he was sick. But it wasn't that. He was just recalling some sad memories. At this moment, the butler ran over to deliver a letter to the Grand Noble. It was a letter from his eldest son, Pal. Mentioning Pal made little Blanche a bit afraid. In the letter, Pal informed the family that this year he would likely return later than usual. Hearing this, Yaku's mother was a bit worried, not knowing if studies at the university were going smoothly, hoping that Pal wouldn't overexert himself. University. Blanche thought hard but still couldn't remember the name of her eldest brother's university. Lot had to explain again for the little girl. The university that eldest young Master Pal was attending was Novarut, the best university in the imperial capital, so certainly anyone studying there would be very excellent. But Lot found that the second young Master Yaku seemed to surpass the eldest brother already. Yaku, being praised, felt proud but could only smile wryly. At this moment, Bruno spoke up, asking Yaku to come to his room after the meal. He informed Yaku that next month would be the fair season in the imperial capital. Yaku had also looked into this a bit. Once a year, the fair would last for a whole month. Due to this fair season, merchants from all over would come, making it very crowded, so Bruno had to remind Yaku to be careful in advance. Careful? Yaku didn't quite understand his father's meaning, so he told Yaku about the letter from eldest son Pal. In the letter, Pal had reported to him that Pathé Island, near the neighboring country, was experiencing a strange epidemic. All 1,000 residents on the island had already lost their lives. Indeed, it was a deadly disease. This disease was quite unusual. Yaku wanted to ask more, But Bruno only knew that much. The highest research committee of Overworked University had brought 2 people back for research, but they had also died from being infected with the disease on that island. Yaku heard this and broke out in a sweat. Then this disease likely was contagious. Bruno also tacitly agreed with Yaku, although now that island had been controlled for the epidemic by the Research Association. Who knew whether the cargo ships that frequently visited that island had brought the disease germ out or not? To enter the imperial capital's fair, they were forced to dock at Marseille port, which was in Yaku's family's territory. So Bruno wanted to find some way to prevent the disease from spreading into this imperial capital. The research group of eldest son Pal had a total of 4 people. 2 of them had been infected with that strange disease. Their hands and feet had necrosed beyond saving. The bodies of those 2 were cremated to prevent the epidemic. And because eldest son Pal had also participated in the experiment, he had been confined to his room and not allowed to go out. That's why eldest son Pal couldn't return home right away. Currently, at Overworked University, they were also using a new tool. According to what Pal described, it was very similar to the microscope that Yaku had invented. So Yaku asked Bruno to send a letter to his elder brother, requesting him to send back a sample of the disease. Meanwhile, at the palace, a meeting was taking place. Since the establishment of the Otherworld pharmacy, the number of deaths due to illness had decreased by 20%. Not only that, but the products sold by Yaku's pharmacy were also very popular with the people, helping the empire enhance its economic trade, a most astonishing achievement. For such a great achievement, the Empress also wanted to reward Yaku. But because Yaku was still too young to be granted a title, the Empress would temporarily keep it on hold. The next day, Yaku had told the whole story of the deadly disease to Ellen. She heard it and was also afraid. If that disease was truly contagious, then now would be the time to organize the fair. Yaku also wanted to prevent it, but it was too late. In just 2 weeks, the fair would take place, and they could no longer prevent goods from docking at the imperial capital. At this moment, Lot ran in calling for Yaku, carrying the letter that eldest son Pal had sent. Yaku read it and broke out in a sweat. Indeed, this world also had the plague. Right after that, Yaku and Ellen had prepared for the situation to prevent the epidemic. They sent 2 close disciples to the Marseille territory to assist Lord Adam first, while Yaku and Ellen would come later after taking care of everything here. After that, Yaku and Ellen reported back to Bruno. According to what eldest son Pal had outlined in the letter, Yaku confirmed this was the plague, an extremely frightening disease that had taken away half of Europe's population in the 14th century. The mortality rate of this disease was extremely high, up to 70%. If it infected the lungs, death was certain. Although having only read about it in books, Bruno also knew the terrifying nature of the plague. The last time it had broken out was 210 years ago. Bruno was very worried. If that disease spread to the imperial capital, the capital would be annihilated. On this issue, Yaku already had a treatment method for the plague. He had developed a new medicine to combat the disease. However, at present, they needed to control the number of infected people first. Hearing this, Bruno immediately understood what Yaku wanted to refer to, and the 2 father and son immediately rushed to the palace to report to the Empress. The Empress was very cooperative and decided to control goods entering the imperial capital immediately. Yaku also asked the Empress to establish additional epidemic checkpoints at the city gates. The inspection work would be handled by people from his Pharmacists Association. Another issue was that the plague spread not only from people, but also from rodents. So Yaku wanted the Empress to decide that the entire imperial capital must join hands to exterminate rats, simultaneously disinfecting clothes with boiling water. Everything Yaku requested, the Empress accepted. Protecting the people was her responsibility. She wouldn't allow that disease to rampage in the imperial capital. Immediately after that, the disease control campaign was implemented. Yaku at the pharmacy called Pierre over and explained the effectiveness of the microscope to him. On Pierre's side, he also prepared very quickly what Yaku requested. The amount of medicine that Yaku provided for him had been divided by Pierre into 1,000 portions and distributed to all other pharmacies in the imperial capital. As long as someone was infected, he would distribute it to them for free. After instructing everything to Pierre, Yaku was reassured to entrust the imperial capital to him, while he would have to go to Marseille port to continue fighting. At the palace, the Empress was now coordinating all issues related to that strange disease. Thanks to the quarantine stations, currently no problems had occurred yet. Moreover, Archbishop Salomon had also gathered followers with wind divine magic to clean the air in the imperial capital. So temporarily the rumor about the strange disease had been completely controlled by them. On Yaku's side, after going around surveying the imperial capital, with everything fine, he and Ellen began their journey to Marseille. However, Yaku was still very worried. An epidemic that he only knew from history. Yaku didn't know if he could win against it anymore. Seeing Yaku worried, Ellen spoke up to encourage and comfort him. Everyone knew what Yaku's abilities were like, and she believed Yaku would succeed. Certainly, others would think the same. Yaku turned back to look. Uncle Cedric and little Lot had come all the way to the door to see them off, along with countless words of encouragement. Thanks to this, Yaku had gained more confidence for this battle. Yaku and Ellen had arrived in Marseille. It had been a long time since she had returned here. Only she didn't expect the reason for returning was because of that vicious disease. Looking at a large fleet of ships preparing to dock, Yaku was certain the disease germs would be among those ships. So before the fair began, he had to complete the quarantine work at this place. Ellen's 2 disciples quickly came out to welcome them. As she had instructed, they had required all ships docking at the port to stop there and participate in the quarantine effort. Then they handed over to Yaku the list of goods docking and the health check results of the crew members. They had done their job very well, and it was also time for Yaku and Ellen to get down to other tasks. He and Ellen took a small boat and rowed offshore, approaching the cargo ships. Not being allowed to dock immediately to unload cargo made the captain quite angry. But in the end, he was still very cooperative with Yaku. Yaku called the ship's doctor to see the complete list of crew members here. Then Yaku and Ellen began to go around checking the crew and cargo. There were no particularly big issues. But Yaku had discovered that some crew members showed signs of minor hemorrhage, so he handed over a prescription to the doctor, requiring them to get medicine for the crew as soon as they docked. The first step of the quarantine process went very smoothly, but it was only the first ship. There were still countless other ships waiting for Yaku and Ellen to inspect before being allowed to dock. At that moment, an apple was thrown straight down to Yaku's position. An angry captain scolded him. It had been 2 days. He had to wait 2 days without being allowed to dock. His cargo was all fresh goods. If they docked late and the goods spoiled, who would be responsible for him? Then another captain shouted, cutting in. He had also waited for 2 days, and at this point, he didn't want to wait any longer. Nor did he want to give way to anyone who wanted to dock and unload cargo first. The 2 captains arguing loudly made Ellen angry. She had just drawn out her staff when a cannon fired straight down to the sea surface, frightening Ellen. Clearly, she hadn't done anything. From afar, a fleet of ships flying the Empire's flag appeared, frightening the 2 captains, because this was the Crimson Fleet of Saint-Fleuve, recognized by the Empire itself. The admiral of the fleet was none other than Yaku's pharmacy acquaintance, Mr. Jean. Standing on the ship, Jean shouted at the 2 captains. Newly entering the Empire to do business meant they had to follow the Empire's laws. The royal pharmacist appointed by the Empress, who was also the minor lord of this Marseille region, was personally conducting quarantine for them. And if they grumbled one more word, he would throw them all into the sea. Thanks to Jean's help, those captains had become much more obedient. Yaku and Ellen went up to his ship to thank him. Jean was feeling quite lonely because Yaku's pharmacy had closed. Regarding the ship candy that he often bought from him, that candy had a great effect on people who were often at sea like him. So he had planned that the next time Yaku reopened the pharmacy, he would place a very large order to share with his other ships to try. After that, Yaku and Ellen regrouped with the 2 disciples, preparing to report back the information they had gathered. When at this moment, Lord Adam frantically ran over to inform Yaku that in Esterk village, many people were showing signs of high fever, then dying afterward. Regarding this Esterk village, it was a small fishing village located to the west of this place. The story was that after learning that at Marseille port there was a quarantine effort, some other merchant ships had smuggled goods into the Empire through that village. Unable to delay any longer, Yaku decided to go to this Esterk village immediately. He handed over all the authority to manage this place to Ellen, making her a bit worried because Yaku was the only one who could detect this disease. Without Yaku here, how could she manage? Yaku didn't think so. It was precisely because Ellen was here that he was reassured to hand this place over to her. Currently, there were already sufficient medical supplies and manpower here, so Yaku believed that as long as everyone worked together, they would repel the epidemic. Yaku drew out the medicine deity staff and sat on it to fly away. On the way, Yaku began to calculate the possibilities. In the shipment docking at Esturk, rats had likely sneaked in, causing the villagers to become infected. By this point, it was too late to catch them. He had to prevent the infected cases from spreading to other places. Due to being too focused on thinking, Yaku almost crashed into a tree, but somehow he was able to fly through that tree. At this moment, Yaku remembered the Archbishop's instructions. This staff didn't belong to this world, so as long as someone was its owner, it would assist the user in many tasks. Yaku was determined to stop this epidemic at all costs. A moment later, he arrived in front of the coastal village of Esturk. The epidemic's rampage had frightened some villagers, who had gathered together to leave this village. And of course, Yaku wouldn't let them go so easily. He flew down to block their path, demanding they return to the village. He would explain the specific situation to them later. However, due to Yaku wearing strange attire, plus the fact that he suddenly appeared from nowhere, this group of people thought that Yaku was the evil spirit causing the strange disease for the village. They fearfully held weapons ready to resist Yaku. Yaku was very annoyed. He immediately created a giant ice wall encompassing the entire village, preventing anyone from leaving here. After that, Yaku took off his hood, revealing the royal pharmacist badge, and everyone immediately recognized him. Yaku tried to explain to them that he had come here to save people. Although he couldn't guarantee he could save everyone, he promised that at all costs, he would save as many people as possible. Thanks to this, they obediently listened to Yaku and returned to the village. Yaku very quickly met the administrators here. Before explaining the situation, Yaku pulled out a map of Esturk village. He divided this village into 3 areas: the heavily infected area, the potentially infected area, and the not yet infected area. Yaku wanted people to seal off the heavily infected area, not because he wanted to abandon them, but so that Yaku could prioritize treating those who were severely ill first. Yaku believed that as long as everyone worked together, they would repel this epidemic. Meanwhile, outside at sea where Mr. Jean's Crimson Fleet was keeping watch, his first mate had discovered an unusual ship and called Jean over to inspect. Through the scope, on this ship were hanging many flags. The most important thing that made Jean break out in a sweat was the flag requesting medical assistance. This ship was infected with the epidemic. Jean ordered his fleet to approach for inspection. Some of his crew members had climbed the mast using binoculars to observe, then fearfully broke out in a sweat when all the members on that ship were already dead. At this moment, the first mate began to panic, not knowing what to do, and asked Jean whether they should board that ship to inspect further. Jean's answer was certainly no. Without a reputable royal pharmacist here, going up there to get infected would surely mean death. So Jean made a decision. He would send off those on that ship peacefully, then ordered the crew to prepare the cannons. In Jean's heart now, emotions were very mixed. Before parting with Yaku, he had given him medicine to cure this disease. If those smugglers had obediently quarantined their goods, they wouldn't have had to lose their lives in the middle of the sea like this. At this point, there was truly no other way to prevent the disease germs from spreading to the mainland. He was forced to sink this smuggling ship to the bottom of the sea. On Yaku's side, the first phase of distributing medicine to those not yet infected had been completed. Now there was only one area left that he had isolated, the heavily infected area. From now on, Yaku wanted to go alone. He demanded that all other medical staff stay in this place. Yaku walked away amidst everyone's concern. Yaku himself was very worried. Just now was only the starting step. Stepping inside here, the air was extremely stuffy, and for Yaku, this was his main battlefield. At Marseille port, there were beginning to be signs of manpower shortage. Seeing this, Professor Casper spoke up to ask the chief pharmacist if she could help with anything. He just looked at her once and left immediately. To him, the professor was already a very old person, so she couldn't help with anything. His contemptuous attitude made her disciple very annoyed. Although she was old, at least she was still a professor. Casper didn't think so. Her specialty was fungi and microorganisms. Even if she helped now, she probably couldn't do anything. At this moment, someone entered the room to announce that the chief pharmacist had requested Casper to meet him. On Yaku's side, he had arrived at the place where the severely infected people were gathered. Opening the door of the room, countless sick people were lying in pain, moaning. Beside them were people from the Divine Temple. Seeing Yaku, a young boy, daring to enter a forbidden place, one of the group spoke up to drive Yaku away. But there was one who recognized Yaku and stopped him. This person had previously been in Archbishop Salomon's group, so he had recognized Yaku. Thanks to his explanation, Yaku could begin his work immediately. According to his experience, those who were too heavily infected, even he might not be able to save, but Yaku still had to do everything within his capabilities. First, Yaku wanted to distribute medicine to everyone, a task he entrusted to the brothers from the Divine Temple, while he would take care of the examination and assessment for the patients. Yaku began to activate his medicine eye to diagnose them. Among all the patients lying here, only 12 people were actually infected with the plague. The others all had different diseases. Most of these people were still emitting light, so Yaku also determined they could still be saved. So he immediately turned and called a person who wasn't sick. This person only had the flu. He had given him medicine and let him leave immediately. However, for safety, he still had to isolate him in his own home. After that, Yaku began to treat those infected with the plague. Thanks to the medicine deity staff, his healing divine magic had increased in effectiveness. The patients were much less in pain. However, with so many people needing Yaku's care at once, he alone couldn't handle it all. At this point, in the fight against the epidemic, Yaku alone could no longer do anything. He had to hope that everyone would join hands and work together. On the side of the Divine Temple brothers, they had also finished distributing the medicine. They quickly reported back to Yaku and wanted to know about the next task. So Yaku immediately assigned them a new mission. Currently, there were several smuggled shipments that had left Esturk village before he arrived. There was a high possibility they were now heading to the imperial capital, and Yaku required these brothers to go find and burn all goods that could potentially be infected. After he finished examining everyone here, he would follow immediately. On Ellen's side, she was also working very diligently. The quarantine work continued until late at night, and the frequency of work was still too dense. Without Yaku here, Ellen had been extremely careful because, after all, she didn't have special abilities like Yaku. Thinking of this made Ellen feel a bit sad. If she had known these things would happen, she would have tried to learn more about Yaku's medical techniques. Seeing Master Ellen a bit sad, her disciple immediately spoke up to encourage her. Indeed, Yaku's speed in examining people was very fast, but to him, Master Ellen was no pushover either. Although she didn't examine diseases as quickly as Yaku, Ellen's speed in inspecting goods was much faster than Yaku's. As pharmacists, they had the opportunity to appear at this place, participating in the quarantine effort to protect and help the people. This was exactly a great dream for other pharmacists. On Professor Casper's side, she had now met with Chief Pharmacist Bruno. First, she had to thank Bruno. Thanks to his patronage, she had been able to maintain funding for her research until now. This time, being called here by Bruno, in her heart, she had prepared herself to close her research, but what she thought was completely wrong. This time, Bruno called Casper here to request her help in carrying out a mission to save this country. He handed her an illustration paper, wanting Casper to continue helping him research to find a type of bacteria that could be used to make a medicine against the plague. Casper put on her glasses and examined it, breaking out in a sweat. She had to ask Bruno which professor could describe this type of bacteria in such detail. Casper looked more carefully and was quite surprised. This type of microorganism in the description seemed very similar to the type of microorganism she had created several years ago. So Casper immediately brought it out for Bruno to check. And indeed, this was exactly what he needed. So Casper quickly gathered all her manpower to be able to proceed with creating a new medicine against that Black Death disease. On Yaku's side, it wasn't until very late at night that he finished treating those who were severely infected. Yaku and the priests stepped out of that place. The pharmacist and leaders were already waiting outside for him. Thanks to Yaku, they had been able to save more than one person in this area. They were very grateful for his help. Yaku had done his best within his capabilities. The rest was just to see how the local people's cooperation against the epidemic would be. Before leaving, Yaku still had to remind the chief pharmacist that inside the ice wall he had created, it had the ability to prevent the disease virus from spilling outside. Yaku requested everyone to limit going outside as much as possible, and additionally, they must join hands together to exterminate rats and fleas. After instructing everyone, Yaku jumped on his staff and flew away. He also didn't expect that helping would take so much time. He didn't know if the brothers from the Divine Temple had caught the smugglers yet. At this moment, Yaku had seen a column of smoke and flew towards it. It was the Divine Temple brothers who had excellently completed the mission Yaku had assigned. The smuggled goods cart, the brothers had quickly burned right away, and the smugglers had been captured and tied up. Yaku landed to check the situation. and then was reported to by the Divine Temple brothers that the people captured here were those showing signs of high fever who had been left behind. Yaku had quickly asked them what was in the smuggling group, but they showed quite a discomfort when having to respond to a kid like Yaku. Yaku just gently sat down and threatened them. They had been infected with a deadly disease. If they confessed now, he would save them, otherwise, forget it. Hearing this frightened them, and they no longer dared to hide and confessed everything. In the transported shipment, there were fruits and a box of animals, which were white squirrels from that Pan island. Yaku heard this and was startled. Pan was exactly the heavily infected island where all 1,000 residents had died. Yaku pressed for more information from these guys, and then he learned that during their journey, there were 4 holy knights accompanying them for protection. The more Yaku thought about it, the more he felt that this time there was something sinister. Normally, holy knights would never protect commoners. Could it be that their mission was to spread this disease all the way to the imperial capital? Thinking of this, Yaku remembered that previously the Empress had also been infected with the White Death, and it wasn't clear who had been the source of infection for her. That time, the Empress had nearly died, but thanks to him, she had been able to keep her life. Could it be because of this that they wanted to bring a new, more frightening disease into the imperial capital? The smugglers had told everything they knew and begged Yaku for medicine. The Divine Temple brothers didn't want to save them at all, but for Yaku, this wasn't his mission. He would still give them medicine, and as for the matter of punishment, the imperial capital would handle it. On the imperial capital's side, Bruno had entered the palace to report all issues to the Empress regarding that smuggling ship. He had received information that goods from them were on the way to this imperial capital. According to the distance from Esturk village to the imperial capital, he estimated they would arrive tomorrow. Immediately, the Empress ordered increased disease inspection at Gate 6, the gate leading to that Esturk village. The next morning, while Lot was running around distributing masks to merchants, Pierre received a sample at Checkpoint 6. Looking through the microscope made him break out in a sweat, hurriedly calling for everyone to come to Gate 6 immediately, because according to what he saw through the lens, it was exactly the Black Death. Just as he finished speaking, a large explosion occurred right at Gate 6 itself. Regardless of whether the guard team pulled up the city gate or not, the Holy Knights following the smuggling group also attacked everything. These were too strong and also had divine magic. The guard team couldn't stop them. The quarantine place was too close to the city gate, and the medicine that Yaku had handed over to Pierre was also being kept there. If this precious medicine was damaged, the situation would become increasingly serious. Pierre, ignoring the danger, tried to run to the tent to save the medicine, when at this moment, he and his teammates discovered that the Holy Knight was pushing a cargo box past the city gate. After that, he opened the cage, releasing white squirrels, then used wind divine magic to push all these squirrels to scatter in all directions. Pierre's tent also collapsed right after that. Seeing the squirrels running and jumping freely on the rooftops made Pierre terrified to the extreme because he still remembered what Yaku had instructed. The Black Death disease spread through rodents, and squirrels were one of those rodents. He quickly stood up and ran to the guard team, requiring them to ring the alarm bell immediately, reporting back to all restaurants and eateries throughout the imperial capital, forbidding these squirrels from intruding into such places. The alarm bell echoed throughout the empire, making the Empress only able to grit her teeth and endure, while Bruno seemed to have known about this situation in advance. In the palace, an emergency meeting had to be organized for the current situation. During the meeting, a man ran in to inform the Empress that the Holy Knights of the Kingdom of Nidale were attacking them, with a military force of about 5 people, which in the Empress's eyes didn't count for much. She ordered everyone to quickly deal with them. At this moment, Bruno spoke up to remind the Empress that according to the report, these 5 Holy Knights came from the Kingdom of Nidale, so he dared to bet they were the ones who brought the Black Death to the imperial capital. At this point, the Empress began to feel strange. Clearly, Nidale was an ally with their country. There was no reason for them to attack the imperial capital with just 5 people. Bruno was certain that the person behind this was definitely someone very knowledgeable about the Black Death. Without experience and knowledge, they would never have been able to set up such a plan. Bruno suspected one person. 3 years ago, the Kingdom of Nidale had accepted a commoner pharmacist into their country. Based on the descriptions from the kingdom, Bruno had determined it was very similar to someone he once knew, a person who had been called a genius pharmacist. However, due to brutal experiments on human bodies, He had his divine magic sealed by the Heresy Investigation Bureau and was demoted to a commoner. Bruno had also heard that when he was captured, he was still researching a type of poison capable of transmitting from one person to another. Hearing this, the Empress had also understood the problem. If the person Bruno mentioned really appeared in the kingdom of Nedale, then surely the death of their king was also caused by this person. Bruno clenched his fist and gritted his teeth. Camus, although his fellow disciple, was in the past already. Such an evil person must definitely be killed, not spared. Outside City Gate 6, the 5 Holy Knights were confronting the Imperial Guard team. Although the Guard team had democracy in hand, the divine magic of the Holy Knights was too strong. They couldn't resist. At this moment, Archbishop Salomon appeared. He was too out of league, so very quickly he had controlled them. Those who did evil against the will of mankind, he did not allow to use divine magic anymore. In the name of the escort of the guardian deity, Salomon captured all and deprived them of their divine magic. The explosions resounding through the sky made Lot very afraid. She discovered that the place where the explosion was very close to the Otherworld Pharmacy, which was Yaku's precious store. She had pulled Uncle Cedric, wanting to go there to help. But Uncle Cedric refused immediately. He knew that compared to the pharmacy, Lot's life was much more important. Just at this moment, a light streak passed in front of Lot. It was Yaku riding on the medicine deity staff. He landed on top of the alarm bell to observe the panorama of the imperial capital. Yaku activated his medicine eye to scan around once to see how far the epidemic had spread. Countless light spots appeared in front of Yaku, making him break out in a sweat. Initially, he had thought the squirrels being transported were just normal squirrels, but no, they were flying squirrels, which would be much harder to deal with. At this moment, Yaku saw Bruno running past, so Yaku immediately landed to explain the situation to him. On the Marseille port side, he had handed it over to Master Ellen already. More importantly now was to try to prevent the epidemic from spreading throughout the imperial capital. The 5 severely injured Holy Knights had been subdued by the Archbishop, but when asked about their purpose, they didn't know anything. They didn't know that they themselves had brought the Black Death to the imperial capital because they were just people following orders. They were forced to do so by a madman, a person who held the life of the entire kingdom. In just the blink of an eye, this person could kill thousands of people. Truly the embodiment of an evil spirit that the Holy Knights feared. Bruno now appeared, describing Camus's appearance to them. What he described was completely accurate. The Holy Knights breathed their last after confirming with him. Bruno ordered the guards to cremate them. The alarm bell had now stopped ringing. Thinking it was safe already, Lot rushed back to the pharmacy. Yaku was also about to return there to compound more when he suddenly discovered a pitch-black shadow on the rooftop. Bruno immediately shouted for the guard team to continue ringing the bell. He was certain that Camus would also follow to the imperial capital to verify the power of his research results. Lot and Uncle Cedric had just returned to the pharmacy when the bell rang again. Seeing the window open, Lot thought Yaku had already returned and rushed in. But Uncle Cedric had felt something wasn't right. Lot rushed up to the laboratory to find Yaku, but he wasn't there. The sound of the door opening startled her. Uncle Cedric entered, sighing, and scolded Lot. Then immediately after, he collapsed. Camus had stabbed Uncle Cedric from behind and was now approaching Lot. Yaku had now returned to the pharmacy. He quickly activated his medicine eye to check. With his ability to see through walls, Yaku had discovered a black shadow in his laboratory. Yaku and Bruno had quickly rushed up to check, only to find Uncle Cedric and Lot already collapsed there. While Camus was still very calmly examining Yaku's research room, Bruno now reminded Yaku to go treat the two of them, while he would stay here to hold off Camus. Camus by this point had transformed into an evil spirit, neither human nor ghost, yet he still tried to stuff his ideals into Bruno's head. Of course, Bruno wouldn't listen and attacked him, but this person was too strong. All of Bruno's attacks were repelled. Yaku ran to Lot and activated his medicine eye to diagnose them. The two were poisoned. Yaku exerted all his memory and knowledge to guess each type of poison. Not just one, they were hit with up to 2 types of poison. Fortunately, Yaku's knowledge was rich, allowing him to eliminate the toxins from their wounds. At this moment, Bruno could no longer resist. He was kicked by Camus straight into the wall. Then he drew his sword and approached Yaku, giving him a compliment that this research room of Yaku was excellent. Yaku was very angry by this point. Just for him alone, he wouldn't save. Yaku punched straight into Camu's face, which made him very indignant and shouted that clearly Yaku possessed a power beyond his understanding. So why didn't he understand his truth? Humans dying from disease was the most beautiful death, or if they overcame disease, then they could become stronger. If Yaku didn't understand, then one day, he would also be lost among humans like him. Yaku didn't care and punched straight into Camu's face, saying that as a pharmacist, one should save people, not kill them. Yaku's punch was so strong that it broke through the wall. Camu fell straight into the garden below the pharmacy. With all his anger, Yaku gripped the divine staff tightly and struck it on Camu. The light emanating from there spread throughout the imperial capital, which made Salomon immediately recognize this was the Plague Eradication Sacred Realm. In the records, the medicine deity staff had many powers, among which the Plague Eradication Sacred Realm was the strongest power. When the medicine deity personally holds the divine staff to eliminate evil spirits, this power is emitted. The epidemic of the imperial capital had been extinguished by the medicine deity. The light faded, and it was also when Camu vanished into the air. Yaku gritted his teeth and cursed him as a fool. At this moment, Lot ran over and hugged Yaku tightly, so everything had ended. However, afterward, the effort to prevent the Black Death was still being conducted by Yaku. Ellen had excellently completed the assigned mission. All ships docking at Marseille were very thoroughly inspected by her. Yaku continuously researched and compounded more medicine against the epidemic. Through his Pharmacists Association, the medicine was distributed to all citizens of the imperial capital. Although not everyone could be saved, it could at least make the citizens no longer worry. At Overworked University, Professor Casper was also very actively engaged in her research work. The new microorganisms she created were all very useful, thanks to which Yaku could compound more types of antibiotics to prevent other epidemics. Thus, the Black Death was no longer an incurable disease for Yaku. Thanks to the joint efforts of everyone, by 2 months later, the Empress could confidently declare that the Black Death had completely ended. Now it was time for the fair to take place. Yaku's Otherworld Pharmacy also returned to operation. It had been a long time since it reopened, making Ellen a bit worried about whether customers would still remember it. The first customer to arrive was Admiral Jean. He even brought gifts from the fair for everyone. The pharmacy door was opened, completely contrary to Ellen's worries. The people had lined up a long queue just waiting to enter and buy Yaku's medicine. Just a moment later, Yaku's pharmacy was again crowded with customers.